Welcome back. All right, so late start for the power rankings this week. I had debated about whether or not to just do the power rankings during the third period of the San Jose Chicago game. I thought, that game really isn't going to change much on the power rankings. It made a small change, but at any rate, I didn't. I've waited until that's over. That was a 4-3 shootout victory for Chicago. I was surprised it didn't go 10 rounds, but hey, at any rate, let's go ahead. I almost said, but that's just a theory, a film. Anyway, that's a whole other channel. You're not on that channel right now, are you? So starting at 32, dropping 2 spots from last week, and this is where things get interesting right away. It's Arizona. Now, Arizona's had a point streak. Arizona's been playing relatively well. The thing is, a lot of the teams at the bottom of the board have actually been playing kind of well. And they've been generating some victories. So it's actually made it so that there's more movement at the bottom of the board than normal. And there's one team in particular in the bottom row that's rocketed up. And so Arizona ends up kind of paying the price there. But for Arizona, yeah, they're 32nd this week. They're probably not going to be next week. The team that's in 31st, I almost had in 32nd this week, which is Vancouver. So, yep, another Vancouver puck. I have a large collection of Vancouver pucks now, and they're 31st. And I had debated about whether or not to have them in 32nd, because, again, there are a lot of teams at the bottom that are actually playing pretty well. Anaheim's playing well. San Jose's getting points. Chicago's playing actually quite well. They actually look decent right now. So it's kind of thrown the whole thing at the bottom of the board into some level of uncertainty, right? So yeah, Vancouver ends up 31st. They lost the game against Boston, but that's the thing. They had a good game. Sealov's had a good game. There were a lot of encouraging performances, and they had the regulation loss. So that's kind of what Canuck fans are looking for right now from the Canucks, which I know sounds terrible to some, but that's how it is. Number 30. And dropping 1 spot from last week, Anaheim. Now, again, Anaheim tonight, they go in and they beat Carolina, but that was really more of a Gibson win than an Anaheim win. And so I didn't move them up. And this is the thing. Again, I felt like the teams that are ahead of them, there was one that I thought about dropping down, but I didn't. And I feel like they're going to end up dropping down into this 30 range anyways. But for Anaheim, they end up 30th this week. And I apologize to Ducks fans everywhere because I know they beat Carolina and you would think they'd move up. But for the week, they end up dropping the 1 spot. Remembering, I don't just count the Saturday games, I count the whole week. And so they drop the 1 spot. Number 29. Also dropping the 1 spot, Columbus. Now, Columbus had the win today as well. So this is where it gets interesting, right? Arizona's had their share of points. Vancouver had the comeback win over St. Louis. They had the shootout loss against Nashville. Anaheim has a win against Carolina. Columbus has a win against Edmonton. But somebody has to be at the bottom, right? So for Columbus, they end up 29th this week. We'll see if they can build off of some of the results. They have a big game tomorrow against Minnesota. Big game from a perspective of this is a team that beat them 2-0 over the last little while here, and they were expansion brethren, so sure, big game. Sure, I that's as close as I can get to generating hype for a Columbus game right now. Number 28, dropping 1 spot from last week, and maybe the one team that I thought about dropping down to 30th, and there will be Flyers fans that will say, well, you should have, but not yet. I'll have them at 28th for this week. Most quotable, Tortorella would be number 1 if we're talking about quotable coaches, and that would be a countdown that would be odd because with quotable coaches, you might have 4 or 5 in the NHL. Most of them are just pat answers because that's kind of how the NHL works. But for Philadelphia, yeah, there wasn't anything to justify moving them up this week, certainly. They do drop 1 spot. So you can see that there's a team that's moved up, that's basically thrown Anaheim, Columbus, and Philadelphia off, all of them down by 1 spot. Also dropping 1 spot from last week. I'll find their puck. I will find it. It's here. I will find it. And that is San Jose. So the San Jose Sharks dropped the 1 spot this week. But again, they're competitive. They're in the games usually. Clearly, Erik Karlsson is having the best season of his career. There's 2 things with Karlsson, though. A, I wouldn't expect him to produce like this on another team where he's not going to be the go-to guy. And B, this is a career year. So we enjoy it. We soak it in. We get everything out of this we can because next year, odds are he drops back to a more normal human total, sort of like Yossi did this year for Nashville. But it's been a great run. I think Karlsson probably stays in San Jose through the deadline, but we will know a week from today what ends up happening, and that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But for San Jose, they end up dropping one spot because moving up 6 spots from last week. 6 spots. Chicago. The Hawks are playing well. And here's the thing, too. So, Patrick Kane not playing tonight. Max Domi still gets a highlight reel goal. Max Domi is still playing well. I honestly think the smartest thing Chicago could do is re-sign him. Whatever you're going to get for Domi is not going to be the equivalent of what Domi could give you next year as you continue through this process. You need a top 6 forward. You need to have legitimate scorers. And Domi has looked more comfortable in Chicago than I think he has since that really good year he had in Montreal. And so I think it would be kind of a shame if he got moved. And for Chicago, there's a lot of players showing they want to stick around. They want to play in the NHL. And for Chicago, it puts them in a good position. Because they're playing well, I think it makes those assets more valuable. So if that's the decision behind maybe trading Domi, that would be understandable to me, right? So if Kyle Davidson came out and said, look, we moved him and we're going to bring him back in the summer, that I could potentially see happening, right? Where they say, all right, well, we'll just bring you back during the summer. We'll trade you as a rental somewhere else. Number 25 on the board this week, and dropping 2 spots from last week. I'll use this one. Yeah, we'll use this puck this week. St. Louis. So for the Blues, the trades have taken place and all of that, but they pick up Kapanen on waivers, and we'll see how that affects things for them if Kapanen can get his game back in St. Louis. With Kapanen, it really is a matter of drive, and it doesn't seem to matter who's on his line or who isn't. When he's got that drive and he's competitive and he wants to be a star and he wants to get the goals, he can be quite good. So we'll see how things work out for him in St. Louis. But you pick him up for free. They had the cap space to do it too, so why not? So yeah, St. Louis drops 2 spots this week, but it's not really about this year now, is it? Number 24, and moving up 1 spot from where they were last week, Montreal. So the Montreal Canadiens get out of the bottom row. They move up here. Montreal winning their share of games recently as well, and being pretty good. And the game against Ottawa tonight, I didn't think they played badly. They just had no puck luck. No puck luck for Montreal tonight. And for Ottawa, they had that. So kudos to Ottawa for that. And we'll see if Montreal stays above the bottom row into next week. Number 23. Also moving up 1 spot from last week, the Ottawa Senators. So for Ottawa, and if anybody's going to, and I know people are going to mention it because I always say, well, why don't you take these stickers off? Because it peels off everything underneath as well. And it really, you can see that there was a sticker there. So Ottawa, again, probably playing for next season. They're not trending in the right direction. They do get the win over Montreal. They sweep the season series with Montreal, but they're still on the outside looking in, and I don't think they're going to pass all those teams ahead of them in terms of making the playoffs. I think they'll keep trying, and I don't see them selling at the deadline because I don't think they need to. I did the video on that a couple days ago, but yeah, I don't see them making the playoffs either. Number 22 on the board, dropping 1 spot from last week. Caps. The Capitals in the sale of Orlov and Hathaway, and that might be all there is to the sale part of things. Maybe they just make that one sale and they keep everybody else. I don't know. We'll see. You know, you've got some more expiring contracts that, as I said in the video I did on the Capitals this week, those expiring contracts could probably bring you back some pretty good assets. So for the Caps, it's been a rough go of it. They're still in the mix for the playoffs, but the numbers would tell you odds are they probably end up on the outside looking in. And if they do get into the playoffs, do they expect to win a round for the first time in a while? So for Pittsburgh and Washington, they're in the same position right now. These teams seem to be tethered to each other when it comes to when they go into rebuilds and when they come out of them. If you look into like Ovechkin, Crosby, both teams were miserably bad at that point in time. And Crosby, Ovechkin end up being top draft picks for them, and the rest is history. So it looks like they're going through that part again. They're just slowly descending in the standings. And so then they get franchise players, right? That's what ends up happening. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Washington if they keep trending downwards or if they can turn that around. Number 21. And down 2 spots from last week, Calgary Flames. So for the Flames, It's been a tough time. And now here's the thing. So it's not that long ago that people were saying, hey, you know, they're still getting points. Yeah, they're losing, but they're losing in overtime. They're still getting the points. Everything's going to be fine. However, now they're not getting the points. Now they're losing the games in regulation, and it just feels like it keeps going in the wrong direction for Calgary. They're now number of points outside of a playoff spot, and the teams they're chasing have played fewer games. It's just the math starts to add up against them. So for Calgary, does Tree Living go all in at the deadline and say we're going to try to, get through this and get into the playoffs, or does he say, you know what, we're not in it this year, and make some moves that signal that to the team, or do you just stand pat? We'll see. But for Calgary, they're kind of in no man's land right now. It's been a while. It feels like since Calgary was in this position where they're almost sort of towards the end of a ginless time. They were always sort of close, so they wouldn't really sell, but they really couldn't buy either. It was a frustrating time for Flames fans. Number 20, and dropping 2 spots from last week, Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh ends up dropping in the overall rankings. And understandably, I would think that they would drop considering that 7-2 loss. Now they did have a victory today, which is fine and great, and they're currently in a playoff spot. But it still feels like for Calgary, or for Pittsburgh and Calgary kind of in the same position. Both teams having been clearly playoff teams, and now they're on. I mean, Pittsburgh's in, but they're. Does it feel like they've really got it going? We'll see, right? We'll see if Jari's able to keep things together. We'll see if Pittsburgh's able to figure all this out. But yeah, for the Penguins, it really does look like both they and Washington could end up on the outside. Number 19, dropping 5 spots from last week. A team that I know last week there were people who said you have Nashville too high on the board. And sure enough, they had a rough week this week. And they are now looking at pretty long odds in terms of being able to make the playoffs. For the Nashville Predators, the drop this week I think is warranted, and so yeah, they're 19th on the board, and they're now in that range of probably not going to make the playoffs. I look at the top 8 right now, the ones that are above the playoff line in the West, and I think they're all pretty much in there. There's all this conversation of, well, Edmonton's going to fall out. I don't think so. LA could fall out. I don't think that happens either. Could Seattle fall out? I don't think that's going to happen. I think the 8 teams above the playoff line in the West probably end up being the 8 teams that make it. But we've been surprised this year, and the surprises are always fun, so maybe the surprises aren't done, and maybe Nashville can get in there. Number 18, dropping 1 spot from last week, the New York Islanders. So the Islanders, they're in a playoff spot, but they're in a really tough spot too because they've played more games than everybody else. So they've got the points. They really need to keep winning. Any losses could come back to haunt them in a month's time when teams start catching up in games played if they're able to win those games. So for the Islanders, they need to win games that they have left against teams that they're fighting for these playoff spots with, and they need to win the other ones too. Like, they need to go on quite a run here. And again, they dropped just the 1 spot this week. It's not a huge difference, but you can see there is a lot of movement this week on the board. Number 17, dropping 5 spots from last week. 5. You shouldn't be dropping 5 spots when you're first in your division, but there's Dallas. So they came back tonight. They got the shootout victory in Vegas. However, the 6 losses in a row took their toll, and so Dallas has ended up in the 3rd row. Now, whether or not Dallas stays here, we'll see, but it's been a rough time for Dallas over the last couple of weeks. And again, 1 game against Vegas, I don't want to put too much stock into that and say, all right, so they're turning it around and bust them right back up to, say, 11th or something. I don't think that's fair to the teams that are in the top 2 rows that I genuinely think have been playing better than Dallas over the last little while. Starting with at number 16, and it's faint praise with number 16 here because they dropped 2. They're dropping 3 spots, and that's Winnipeg. The Jets, it's been a tough go of it, and they really should be ahead of Dallas. Considering how rough Dallas has had it, they were 2-3-5 in their last 10 coming into today. Winnipeg should be ahead of them, but Winnipeg 4-7 in their last 11. So the Central, the top 2 teams in the Central aren't really the best 2 teams in the Central right now, and for Winnipeg, maybe adding Nino will make the difference. We'll find out tomorrow, right? They're at home against the Islanders. We'll see if they can start to turn this around or not, because the Islanders should be playing some desperate hockey. Winnipeg needs to have a pulse to start that game, unlike the one against Colorado, where it was just a disaster from the start, pretty much through till the finish. Number 15 on the board, big mover this week. And I mean, seriously, up 5 spots, Buffalo. So I want us to take just a moment here and appreciate that this is the last power rankings of February. Buffalo's in the top 2 rows. Buffalo's playing well. The wins over Tampa Bay and Florida, huge. Here's the problem. They have to win at home. So as much as I'm really happy to see them win these games against teams that are, in or around the playoff hunt, and I thought the win over Tampa was important, and then the win over Florida was pretty good and showed that Craig Anderson can still play. And so there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic if you're Buffalo, but they have to start winning at home. Because if they don't start winning at home, this is as high as they're going to get. They're going to end up back in the 3rd row next week, and we'll be talking about what's wrong with Buffalo at home. Why can't they win? I think the record at home is 11-15-2. That is bad. Just miserable. If they were 15-11-2 at home, we'd be talking about whether or not they might be able to catch Tampa. But we are nowhere near that conversation. So we'll see what Buffalo is going to be able to do in the coming weeks. Just win at home. Just win at home, and then maybe fans will start flocking back to watch you again. And then next on the board, at number 14, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Florida. So I'm torn on which teams are going to make it, but it feels like Florida's trending in the right direction. Despite tonight's result, I still think Detroit's trending in the right direction, and Buffalo. So these are 3 teams. 2 of them end up being the wild cards. I'm going to be happy because honestly, if it's Buffalo and Detroit, that'd be great because it'd be 2 brand new teams that haven't been in the playoffs in a long time. If Florida gets in as a wild card, and if they were against Boston, that could be a really fun series. If they got in as a wild card and ended up against Carolina, we know those teams don't like each other. So there's a lot of reason to think if Florida makes it, we could be in for some serious fun, right? And so, yeah, Florida ends up moving up 1 spot. I want to see some more consistency, but they're winning often enough that they're still in the top 2 rows. Number 13, and dropping 2 spots from last week, is Edmonton. I'm just checking. Yeah, it's 2 spots from last week is Edmonton. So what I find interesting with Edmonton is that there is a very vocal portion of hockey fandom that when Edmonton loses, we will see a lot of negativity thrown their direction. The reality is that Edmonton's not secure when it comes to the playoffs, but they're not in that bad a shape. So they get the big win over Pittsburgh. And then today against Columbus, I don't know what the heck that was, but it wasn't good, right? So, and I agree, Jack Campbell could be better. Skinner's clearly the better goaltender. Edmonton needs to figure things out when it comes to goaltending, but they also need to work on the defense. The defense being caught out of position as often as it is, it's not on any one guy either. There's definitely a coordinated discoordination with that blue line, and that needs to be fixed because offensively this team is just absolutely in charge. And so we'll see what happens with Edmonton in the coming weeks, but it's one of those really divisive teams, and to me, they do drop. Keep in mind that 2 weeks ago on this board, they were 7th. They've gone from 7th to 13th. So sometimes I think people get mad because teams don't move up as fast as they want or down as fast as they want. And for me in general, it comes down to how well are they playing and what do I think they're going to be able to do this week. And I try not to overreact. Yet I'm wearing Minnesota. Minnesota last week was 22. They still haven't shown up on the board yet. So number 12 on the board, moving up 4 spots from last week. 4 spots. Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings, number 12. So again, let us just take a moment. Detroit, Buffalo, both in the top half of the power rankings in February. And this is not one of those jokes I used to do at the end of my power rankings where I would mess around with all the power rankings on the board just to catch people that would skip to the end and would say, how the hell are Buffalo first? And Detroit's there legitimately. Even tonight against Tampa, they should have won that game, but Vasilevsky decided he was going to be really good, and nobody was going to stop him from getting that shutout. Larkin is going to have so many nightmares tonight about Vasilevsky because Larkin played a fantastic game and had no points to show for it because Vasi said no. So, yeah, I think Detroit's playing really well. I think the confidence is there, consistency's there. And so all the talk of who might get sold is kind of gone. Bertuzzi's not on the market. And as long as they're in the mix and they're one of those teams with 64 points in the East, yeah, I think we're going to see Detroit hang on to everybody and maybe add. They might be in a position to add at the deadline. As weird as that sounds, Eiserman could decide to add at the deadline, and I kind of hope that he does because I would like to see that message sent to that locker room. Number 11. So this is I will admit this is a ridiculous movement from a team, but I think they've got it figured out. That's Minnesota. So maybe it's the Kale and Addison problem, right? Because they take Addison out of the lineup, and suddenly they're winning all the games. Now they didn't win last night against Toronto. They lost that one, 2-1. But they played their game. And their game can be kind of hard to watch. It can be a little boring, the game against Columbus being an example. But Minnesota's playing Minnesota hockey right now, and they're playing it well. They're above the playoff line. They're within shooting distance of first in the division. They're right there with Colorado. I think with the way things have been unfolding, we could see Dallas and Winnipeg drop to third and fourth in that division. Minnesota and Colorado end up finishing first and second, which, considering where Minnesota was as recently as a couple weeks ago, is nothing short of remarkable. So if anybody sees Jesse Pierce, tell her she's going to be able to believe in Minnesota for the rest of this regular season. I won't promise her anything for the playoffs, but she can believe in them for the regular season. Just she can cross her fingers a little bit and just believe. She doesn't have to say they're going to lose every game before she does these previews and she's afraid of jinxing them. And I feel that because I'm always afraid of jinxing teams I cheer for. That's why during preview videos I don't wear Boston, I don't wear Vancouver, I don't wear Dallas because I'm like, no, I don't want to jinx them. But for what she does, she doesn't. I don't think she has to worry about it. I think Minnesota's pretty good right now. And Fleury's been playing better. And again, as soon as you take Addison out of the lineup, things just start to change and they start winning games. So we'll see what happens with Addison at the deadline. Number 10, dropping 2 spots from last week, Seattle. So the Kraken 4-5-1 over their last 10, but I'm not going to overreact to this. The 6-5 loss against Boston was just a sloppy game. And Seattle gets into those sloppy games here and there. It just happens. But for Seattle, they're still above the line. They're still ahead of Calgary. And that's the thing. Calgary's the first team below the playoff line, right? So right now they're tied with Minnesota. Minnesota's caught them. And so they're tied for that wild card spot. They have the tiebreaker right now in Minnesota. I still think Seattle's in pretty good shape to make the playoffs. And I'm looking forward to that. Seattle in the playoffs, kind of the same as Detroit and Buffalo. I love the idea of this year's playoffs when I'm doing previews, having teams we did not expect to be in there. I think it's going to add a lot of excitement. I think it's going to add a lot to... I think ratings could go up too. I know ratings are down this year in the NHL, but I think having some new teams in the playoffs people aren't used to could add ratings or maybe change where those ratings are coming from. Maybe markets that normally aren't watching in the playoffs because their team isn't in there suddenly are very interested, like, say, Detroit. Number 9 on the board. And dropping 2 spots from last week, the LA Kings. So for the Kings, I mean, they did a good job against the Islanders. I will say this. They did a good job against the Islanders, and they protected Quick. I saw it as them protecting Quick, understanding that Jonathan Quick is not the same goaltender now that he was 10 years ago, and so they really limited the Islanders' chances in that one. If the Kings can keep playing like that, they're in good shape. Kings kind of doing a very similar thing to Minnesota, that the games may not be high opportunity, but as long as you're winning, it's okay. Like, as long as you're winning, it doesn't really matter. You're not all that concerned. The wins are what matters, not the entertainment value, right? So for LA, they're not in the top row, but they're still in the top 2, and obviously they're right next to the top row. Number 8, moving up 3 spots from last week, Vegas. So the Vegas Golden Knights, they're first in the West right now. They're the top team in the West, and they're playing well. They did have the shootout loss tonight against Dallas. They couldn't close out that game. I didn't feel like I needed to bust them down for that. So they stay in 8th spot where they were to start the day as well. And yeah, Vegas looks like they're going to make the playoffs. It looks like they're over the malaise they had after Mark Stone left the lineup where he got hurt. They definitely look like a shell of their former selves when that took place. But yeah, they're right there. And they're in the top row. And so for people that were really rooting for Jack Eichel not to get playoff games this year, It looks like he might. But how ridiculous would it be if both Vegas is in the playoffs with Jack Eichel and Buffalo in the East? Then both teams kind of win the trade, don't they? And I say that because Eichel has been prominent for Vegas recently, too. He's been playing pretty well. Sure, the point totals may not be where you want them to be, but he's been playing well. Number 7 on the board, dropping 3 spots from last week. Now, I've seen some negativity directed towards the Rangers. They have lost 3 in a row in regulation, but it's easy to forget they also had this really long streak of getting points in every game before the 3-game losing streak. So I'm not overreacting to the losing streak for the Rangers. I think that they're still in good shape. I think they're still likely to finish in the top 3 because they're 8 points clear of any team that's going to try to catch them, of the Islanders. I don't think the Islanders catch them. So they're still going to finish in the top 3. They're likely to play New Jersey, although New Jersey's getting closer to Carolina because both teams are winning, but New Jersey's winning enough too that they are keeping Carolina in their sights. So if the Rangers play Carolina in the first round, that'd be great. But if the Rangers play New Jersey in the first round, I think that'll be war. I do. I think that'll be war. The comment section could be really interesting underneath that series. So we'll see who it ends up being, but I still think the Rangers end up third. It's just with their recent struggles this week, it's pretty certain they finish third now. Number 6, and finishing in the same spot as last week, so no difference, and that is Tampa Bay. For the Tampa Bay Lightning, good week, and by good week, it keeps them in the same spot as last week, and I say that even though they did lose that overtime game against Buffalo, which was a surprise. Lyubushkin with an overtime goal and a short-handed overtime. You could have made so much money making that your own bet on the THG BetX, but at any rate, nobody did. So all the money went to, I don't know. My lawyers won't tell me. Anyways, Tampa Bay's number 6, and I really think that any team playing them in the playoffs is going to have a really hard time getting them out. Vasilevsky tonight looked like Vasilevsky in the playoffs. That's bad news for the rest of the NHL. Number 5. And same spot as last week as well. So not moving up, not moving down, is Toronto. For Toronto, good week. And I thought what I liked with them this week too is, so I talked about Minnesota playing their game. And the fact that Toronto played against Minnesota, and it was Minnesota that controlled the pace, and it felt like Minnesota controlled how the game unfolded, and Toronto still won. That's important because during the playoffs, we've often seen them get out of their game and lose. Teams figure out how to disrupt the flow of the game and take them out of their element and put them in a situation where it's not their kind of a game. Right now, it seems like whatever kind of game you want to play, Toronto can play it. Could they be more physical? Sure. Does that get overplayed? I think it does. I think it gets overplayed a little bit. I think Toronto's in good shape, and I think if this is our first round series, and it looks like it will be Toronto and Tampa, that's going to be absolutely fantastic. And I think Toronto has a shot. I'm not saying they knock Tampa Bay out. I'm saying I think they have a shot. When you go to a Game 7 and you lose every time, people lose sight of the fact that you still got to Game 7, meaning you won 3 out of 6. And I think with Toronto, it's mental as much as it's physical. I in fact, it might be more now 65% on the mental side, that when things start to go wrong in a Game 7, they just cascade because there's something there. If they can ever overcome that, who knows what happens. Number 4 on the board, absolutely ridiculous week. An absolutely ridiculous run for Colorado. Colorado moves up 5 spots. So if I wasn't wearing a Minnesota jersey, I would be wearing a Colorado jersey. But Colorado doesn't make the dramatic move up the board Minnesota does. For Colorado, they're back. The wins over Winnipeg and Calgary, this is the Avs. This is how they work. They're scoring early, they're scoring often, and they're playing really solid defense. Calgary, a team that desperately needs points, had 5 shots in the third period tonight because strong forecheck, really good play by all 4 lines, all the defense buying in, and this is without Makar. This is without Landeskog. This is, I don't want to keep going because I'm going to turn into the Grinch. Came without boxes and bags. But at any rate, Colorado's playing really well, even though there's some key guys that are out. Even though people have said at times, well, I don't know about Georgiev. Georgiev's playing well. He's had a couple of shaky games here and there, but he's playing well. And so, yeah, the Avs, they look legit. I don't know what else to say. Number 3. Right here. Number 3, same spot as last week, New Jersey. For the Devils, really, really strong play. I get the feeling that for the rest of this season, New Jersey should be guaranteed, I would think, top five. I don't think New Jersey is going to be anywhere below the top five, and I think New Jersey could end up number one on the board at some point. The Devils playing really well. Jack Hughes has been really good, hasn't skipped a beat returning from injury. I really don't have anything negative to say about the New Jersey Devils, which is strange because, again, at this time of year, New Jersey, Detroit, Buffalo, all in the top half of the, and Seattle in the top half. This is so different than what we might have expected before the season started, correct? But that's why I love the NHL right now. There's so much. I mean, we can call it parity. Is it true parity? Kind of, sort of, yeah. When you consider that some of the teams at the bottom of the board are getting some wins now, and Chicago might be hosing their chances of getting Bedard, yeah, there's some parity in the league right now. Number 2 on the board, and dropping down one spot from last week, is Carolina. Now, this was a tough call. So let me put Carolina up at 2, and then at 1, let's move that over there. You know, I don't have. It's odd that I don't have the new reverse retro puck for Boston, isn't it? So Boston's number 1, Carolina's number 2. So here's my reasoning behind the switch. Carolina loses the game tonight against Anaheim. Boston wins their games this week. And I just feel like right now, Boston is that number 1 team in the NHL. And that it was a solid game they played against Vancouver. Vancouver did pretty well against them in second and third. Carolina, the one concern I have with Carolina is they don't score as much as they should. And I think that's what sunk them in the playoffs last year. It felt like they had everything in place. They just didn't score as much as they should. It's really, really small. But it feels like the difference between Boston and Carolina and New Jersey, between these 3 teams right now, is so small. Any of these 3 teams, in my eyes, could win the Stanley Cup this year. Keeping in mind Colorado's right here. So these 4 teams could very well end up being the 4 favorites for the Stanley Cup. Now, if the Rangers get Patrick Kane, people are going to say, well, Patrick Kane, that's going to make him Cup champs. Not necessarily. Tarasenko, people said, oh, Tarasenko, this is great. And look at Panarin. And right now, Tarasenko, in 8 games with the Rangers, has 2 goals and 2 assists for 4 points. So it hasn't been that reawakening for Tarasenko that was expected. And the Rangers now have lost 3 in a row in regulation. So, again, we can make it so these trades are overblown. But these 4 teams, I think, are the most likely right now. I really do. I think that you can make an argument for Boston, for Carolina, for New Jersey, and Colorado. And especially once Colorado gets Landeskog back and Makar's healthy. You can really make that argument. The other nice thing with Colorado is that Bowen Byram started playing like Bowen Byram. So there you go. There's 1 through 32. And I really wanted to explain this because this is a tough call. And I really went back and forth on this, and I said, no, Boston goes back into first, Carolina's in second, New Jersey's in third, and Colorado, I feel, has earned 4th spot. They are playing like Colorado, and the West should be very concerned because the West has been very mediocre in general. It feels like Vegas is rounding into form, though, and so is Colorado, and those could be the 2 teams to beat in the West. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It means a lot. Remember, we're getting closer and closer to the end of the season. We're less than 2 months away. So thank you guys so much for your support. I will talk to you again soon.